Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Foresight TV. I am excited about this episode because we are going to talk about how to make work life better. I have two amazing guests who are expert on this, but before we get started, let's run this. Hey guys, Steve Moran here. So before I got started, I got to do one more piece of housekeeping. If you are a senior living operator and you are struggling with paying too much money for temporary staffing, you need to be talking to our friends at KARE. They do an amazing job of giving you people to fill in those spots where you're missing full-time staff, or maybe you even program it without charging the prices that you would pay to a traditional staffing agency. Everything they do is app based, and of course, if you have somebody that you hire from KARE and you fall in love with them, you can hire them with no cost or penalty. Nobody gets mad about it. In fact, they celebrate. So it is a great way for you to beef up your staffing, frontline staffing, nursing. And besides that, they are just great, wonderful people to talk to. So if you're not working for them, you're not talking to them, you should, unless you've got more people working in your community than you know what you need. And with that, Brett and Emily, welcome to Foresight TV. Let's start, Brett, with who you are, and then I'll let you introduce Emily as you would like to do that.
Yeah. Brett Landrum, founder and co-CEO of Procare HR. Schedule A, which we'll talk a little bit about today, is an offshoot of Procare. Emily Timm is the director of operations for that. So she's the brains and execution behind that particular service line and business for us.
Okay, and what is Schedule A? Well, let's start with what that is.
Yeah, I'll let Emily go a little bit more in depth. I'll frame up the problem, and then I'll let Emily talk about what Schedule A is. So we talk to hundreds of senior living providers and operators a year, and one of the biggest challenges that we hear is they're really trying to figure out how do we capture kind of the incremental labor dollar. How do we drive down our payroll expenses? Obviously, we want to provide good care and high quality of care and make sure we're meeting our staffing ratios. But oftentimes, there's a percentage of our payroll that's just going out the door every day on things like, overtime, or we're not adjusting, staffing ratios appropriately and things like that. And as we talk to our clients, the themes kept coming up. And so a couple of years ago, we tried to build a business to help our customers capture some of those labor dollar savings. So I don't know, Emily, you want to share a little bit about who Schedule A is and what we do?
Yeah, perfect. So, to Brett's point, we've got this issue. It continues to come up with our clients, and it's I like to say it's never rocket science, but it's accountability, and it's how do we continue to really focus on the labor dollars. It's such a big part of course, the operating expense of these companies, but we get into the day-to-day, we've got resident issues that come up, and the second we take our finger off the pulse there, those labor dollars can go astronomical. And my goal is to interject to look at all these different items. We've got probably 15 different things that we're looking at on a regular basis for our clients related to some that Brett mentioned. We've got our overtime expense. Are we overscheduling PTO? What are our agency costs? Do we have all of our full-time employees working full-time hours? So a whole series of different measurements that we're looking at that are really driving those expenses up or down. And at the very basic level, to Brett's point, it's, are we staffing for what we really need? And how do we evaluate what we actually need in a building? So, my goal is to partner with these communities or these companies and help you sit down and look and say, here's where your revenue is. Here's what your client census is. Here's your licensure that you need to abide by. Here's your accreditation, whatever the case might be that is driving some of those staffing levels, in addition to, of course, resident acuity, and ensuring that what we've got from a staffing level at a given site actually meets what we need as a baseline. Then once we have that, are we continuing to meet that? Are we continuing to drive our staffing strategy around that? And, back to what I said initially, it's really just someone to help partner and keep the pulse on that as the world continues to go on, because the world will continue to go on and priorities will come up. But knowing that this can get out of control really quickly. And a main focus we've got right now is, of course, coming out of the pandemic, we did what we needed to do to survive, right? And that meant higher labor costs in some cases. So being able to work with our clients to help scale that back, as well as then ongoing, how do we continue to help partner with you to make sure your labor costs are in line with where they should be?
So let's actually start. I'd like to talk a little bit, maybe have you address where kind of the low-hanging fruit is. What are you seeing operators doing or not doing that they could be doing that would improve their labor costs? I'm really always anxious to try to give some concrete, solid things that can be taken away. So, Emily, I'm going to start with you, and then Brett, I'm sure you'll have some stuff to chip in. And of course, we love stories more than anything else.
Perfect. I think one of, this sounds very basic, but is just the visibility to some of these key metrics is the word I'll use. But, if we're looking, if we have a goal, are we actually looking at that goal, and how are we measuring it? So one of the biggest things we have found, and I would encourage anyone out there, but is to have a technology system that is going to drive your scheduling and give you that real-time visibility to some of these key numbers that you're looking at. You don't want to quantify it too much and get too much in the data, because of course we're a people-to-people business, but that the visibility to that is critical. Am I overstaffing? I would say half the people we start working with don't even know, because they don't have a way to measure it. And so, I would say, practically speaking, a really strong technology system is going to help from a scheduling perspective that doesn't just put people on the schedule, but can help input those budgets and say, this is what we need to staff for, and here's where we're over, under. I would say the biggest thing we're seeing is this overtime. It's the metric I love the most, but overtime percent or overtime hours is a percent of total hours. So the moment that we start honing in on that and saying, hey, we've got X amount of overtime, that automatically starts to drop, and we see it consistently above where we would anticipate it would be, but we're just not looking at it. And that's not a fault of anyone, but it's, how do we gain that visibility? And so it's been fun to see where we can hone in on one or two or three key metrics with this technology system, where those numbers can really be impacted.
So do you think that should the goal be zero overtime?
I would say no. I just don't think that's a reality. Our goal is that our clients are operating under 5% of their total hours are overtime hours. So that's the number that we continue to push and focus our efforts around.
I might answer that question a little differently.
Yeah. Okay.
So look, you think about it, building a house, right? Like, we want to get the foundation poured, and then then you start framing it, and the really nice, the furniture doesn't come in until the last step, right? So how I think about this is it really, the good baseline is, all right, first we need a scheduler. Then we need to make sure people are using the scheduler. Then we've got some key metrics, like we want people under 5% of total hours for scheduled overtime. But then you start moving in some of the feng shui and the nice stuff, and you say, all right, well, we're at 5%. Why can't we be better? And and then it's, all right, how do we get to 3%? But I think getting to some of those baseline numbers out of the gates often is a pretty intensive process and is a lift. But once we get there, then it's about iteration and refinement, and it's more surgical to capture the incremental dollar, right? There's kind of a place that you get to where you say, you can use broad sweeping strokes to improve and get to base, or wherever that baseline is, and then it's, like I said, the surgical approach to improve beyond that. But I think once we get there, like, we should be pushing hard to improve beyond that, and maybe that's outside of just scheduling. That's looking at some of the talent acquisition, but there is opportunity to drive better results than the baseline.
Yeah, really good point, Brett. I think I will backtrack a bit, but I've had this goal of 0 before in a past scheduler life, and it's where it gets so defeating, where it's like, well, I can't get there tomorrow, so how do I impact that? So I think that incremental approach is a really, really good thing to highlight. Of here's where we want to be, and then to your point, how do we continue to get better?
So when you go into a company and they go, man, we just think we're not getting this, that we're spending too much on labor and we've got too much overtime, what are the things that you commonly see people doing that is sort of low-hanging fruit to fix that or to reduce that?
It's a good question. There's probably a lot of things I would identify. One of those really, I think, comes just around the scheduler themselves. So the human being that's doing the scheduling and how we're scheduling. So one of the key things I find is we're putting people in regular schedules. Maybe it's because of a recruiting issue, or maybe not. We know they can work these schedules and they can work 6 days a week. Well, that's consistently putting them into extra hours or into higher costs. I think that's one of the main things that we can really help identify right away. The other piece is, I'd really challenge people to look at, are all your full-time staff actually working full-time hours, right? Because full-time staff come with other costs, but if we're not, then they're not meeting those hours, and then subsequently we're paying other people more money to work hours, there's a disconnect there. And so bridging that gap and closing that gap there is one of the big things that can be done, frankly, really quickly, to bring people back to, hey, you were hired at this amount of hours, you're not consistently working those, how do we get those up? Because you may have current staff and not need to go to the talent acquisition world where you've got the staff to work the hours. It just comes back to, let's get people working what they're committed to.
So where does contract labor come into this in terms of how you look at it and what you do?
So what we do, sorry.
Yeah. So
Okay.
so we talked about KARE and we know that most senior living communities are using some contract labor. They're using KARE, which likely keeps their costs lower, or they use a more traditional staffing agency, which tends to be a lot more expensive to fill in those extra gaps. And so where does all that fit in with each other?
Yeah, so agency staff, right, is a great thing. Oh, go ahead, Brett.
Yeah, I think we're going to say the same thing, but I mean, look, like there's a reason that KARES exists and agencies exist, right? Like we have a shortage of workforce, our workforce shortage, and I think just every organization runs into scenarios consistently where that service is essential to being able to provide care and run their organization. And so that's an essential tool. And I think one of the things that we really challenge our clients on is making sure that's it's like a planned unplanned thing, right? Like, what are the activities that we can take as a scheduler so that we're not like, I'd say we're not openly looking for opportunities to use agency. We are doing the best to use the resources we have, and then we're using an organization like KARES to come in and help fill those shifts that we otherwise wouldn't be able to fill and not provide the care we want to provide, et cetera. So we look at it like it's an imperative resource in the space, and it's not one that is ever going to go away or not be needed. But it's how do we be a little bit more planful about how and when we're using it, and what are the strategies to make sure that we're controlling the costs when we are leveraging it.
So one of the, if you'll allow me, I'm going to see if I can maybe take a little bit of a twist in how we approach this. Um, Emily, you talked about the scheduler, and I've heard this before, right? There are always one or two people who want to pick up as many shifts as they can, and they know that if they can get into that overtime zone, that the money goes way up, and their life is, either because it's how they're built, or because they need the money and they make themselves available, and so that makes the scheduler's life super easy, right?
Mhm.
And then you also talked about this idea that you've got full-time staff that you're maybe not fully utilizing. And as I listen to you talk about that and I think about that, one of the things that occurs to me is that it suggests one of two things. At first, it suggests they simply do not have enough people on the payroll to fill all the shifts that they need to fill, or that they've actually got enough people who theoretically could work, but somehow the work environment is not such that people want to work any more than they have to. And so I'd love to have your thoughts on sort of what the work environment looks like and how big an impact that has on this equation.
Sure, I would, definitely work environment for all of us is going to drive our desire to work more or less. I think, admittedly, just where we've been as a nation, as a world, the last couple of years has just frankly burnt people out, and so, that's part of the work that we're working with as well. Of a lot of people either left the industry or took a break from the industry or needed to just pare down after several years of working really hard, and we're working to come back from that. So I would say, of course, in any company, your culture is a big piece of what drives people to work or not. I also think there are extra factors here related to just the world we've come out of over the last several years that requires some extra TLC and understanding, while also still meeting the business needs and making sure that we're, at the end of the day, serving the residents and the patients and getting them the care and quality that they deserve as well, in the midst of just trying to get those shifts staffed as well.
Right, right. So, I mean, but I guess I'm still going to push a little bit harder, Brett. I'm going to talk to you because we had this conversation before we went on air, and I was talking about our team meeting today and how I sort of depressed them with my opening. And you have a very different approach, which is to tell jokes, right?
Yeah,
And dad jokes.
correct. Yeah, I think it's hilarious. Our team depends on who you ask when, but yeah.
But that's not just for entertainment. There's some strategy behind doing that and making it a fun place to work, right? And so, do you have thoughts about how people? I mean, the in my mind, we started this idea of we need awareness that where we're spending this money that we don't need to pay, and I just if what else do you do? What do you actually do to make it so that people are going to love coming to work and this cost goes down?
Yeah, it's a great question and great point. And I think, yeah, so I wrestled in college, not very well, but I had an opportunity to be around some really great teams and around some great people. And I had a college coach that I always used where I got this from. He used to start every single practice with a joke, and he was always like, he was very intense, but he was kind of a goofball. And his thesis, which is like very different than like most wrestling cultures, because wrestling cultures, like, we're really hard nosed and we work hard and we take everything seriously, whatever. And his thesis was really like, and he used to say this, is the college wrestling sucks. It's really hard. And like the work we do every day, and we're going to push hard, it's not fun. So my job as a leader is to try and infuse just a little bit of humor and fun into into a really unfun process. And I think about like the work we do, and while it's rewarding, it's really hard. Like people and HR is a tough business in senior care, and it's strenuous, and it's hard to do it well, and oftentimes it's not always fun. And so it's what we've tried to do is like, how do we bring a little bit of fun into an unfun thing at times, or a hard thing. And I think your point, Steve, is well taken. And the senior care world is like, providing care is incredibly rewarding, but it can be really, really, really challenging at different points. And so how do we as as an industry make it a little bit more fun and infuse infuse humor and life and some joy into the process of doing something that's not always fun or that's not always easy.
Cool. Emily, do you have anything you want to add to that?
I was just thinking back to the days where I was in the senior living world. I think that's exactly it. It's how do you create, whether it's humor or fun or events that bring people together. I mean, I think the biggest thing in senior care in general, and then, I'll tout again the last couple of years, is it's about community, and it's about how do we get through this together? How do we do this together? How do we make a difference together? So as leaders, how can we bring our people together to want to support each other, to want to pick up that extra shift when they're working short, because they've got a mutual community and respect for the people that are going to be working short if nobody else shows up, right? So how do we drive that community and that desire to support each other, and in creating, I think back to, we had potlucks and we had these pride days where we'd all be proud of our company and wear the company color, and what are those things that can just create that camaraderie and create part of your identity as a community.
So I love that. One of the questions, we've got a number of partners who work with a large number of senior living, both companies and organizations, and they have a lot of data. And one of the things that we're spending a lot more time talking with them about is figuring out how to use this data in a way that will help everybody do a better job. And so in my mind, what that means is sort of taking data and turning it into stories that have meaning. So Emily, particularly for you, as you work with these communities on being more efficient with their staffing dollars, I'm sure you have a range of companies that are really doing a good job and companies that have opportunity to get better, right?
Yep.
So what are the differences between the two? I mean, what are you seeing in the ones that have more opportunity ahead of them than the ones who've maybe gotten most of the way there? What are you seeing in the differences?
Good question. I would say part of it, comes back to just tenure in the industry or tenure in the roles of the leaders that we're working with. Sometimes I'll work with brand new leaders that, are maybe just out of school, and, that's conversely with people that have been 50 years in the industry. I'd say that drives some of it. I also think there's an element to your point on data, recognizing that there is data, right? So I think those that are doing maybe better than the others recognize that there's a lot of data out there and things that we can do with it. That said, that the time to dig through all that data is tough. So to your point of what do we do with that data is, where I hope to jump in and help. But the people that can just say, hey, here's all my data, help me figure out what it means. Typically, they're the people that actually are doing pretty well because there's some semblance of measurement for this stuff. And that's, of course, in addition to what we were just talking about related to the humor, the camaraderie, creating a good culture and place for people to work that want to come to work. But then it's about, I'll always go back to relationships. Between data and relationships, I'm set. But, do you have those relationships with the people that can show up, that will work? And I would say a big piece, this is very tactical, but is, do you have staff that are working regular schedules? So, if you can walk away with one thing, if you've got staff that aren't working regular block schedules or core schedules, that's a huge piece that just creates consistency for both staff, for residents, for schedulers, versus kind of that ad hoc staffing day after day. Who's coming in tomorrow? How do I get people in this week? Versus, hey, my name's Emily. I work the same days every week. I know when I'm going to be there. So even the staffing strategy is very much, in my mind, what drives the difference of, are we staffing for tomorrow or are we staffing for 6 months down the road?
Okay. Yeah, I really like that a lot. The other thing that what you're talking about really triggers me is that we have one of the things that I hear very frequently that's changed in the workforce is that people kind of just got their schedules and they worked, and if they had to miss a kid's birthday party or ball game, they just kind of sucked it up. And it seems like after COVID, people are really saying, I'm not going to do that anymore. There are lots of jobs out there and you got to figure out how to work around me, or I'm going to go quit and I'll go work at the community down the street. Where does that play into all of this? Brett?
Yeah, I think flexibility of in the schedule is, I think, becoming critically more important. I think particularly with our caregivers, you see that where it's like this, kind of a vicious cycle. Somebody wants to go to the kids' game and is scheduled, and maybe, let's say we don't have the technology in place. So I realize I'm scheduled a little bit late. I don't show up because I'm going to prioritize my kid's game. Then I feel a little bit guilty. So then then in the next shift tomorrow, I'm debating if I want to go tomorrow because well, now I'm going to go in and they're going to know that I missed and I'm going to get crap for missing. So do I really want to go back? Then I missed that shift and now I have 2 call no shows. And suddenly we send them a term letter and say, hey, you've had 2 no call no shows, you're out. And while we do need that reliability in senior care, I think recognizing that how we work and how people work and the level of flexibility that they're going to demand has changed. And we can either embrace that and figure out, what are the tools and processes we can install to support it, or we can kind of remain rigid and be a victim of that change.
So, Emily, any additional thoughts on how you work with that? I mean, you're dealing with this day to day as you're working with your clients, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's this ongoing debate of policy versus, the rule versus the exception, and how do we remain consistent, right? Because we've got to remain consistent, but also, support our staff where they're at. I think back to whether it's culture or really what we're doing. I mean, we talk a lot about it at Procare as well, of just how do we relate to what we're actually impacting. So we can sit and I could do my work all day long, but how does this actually impact not only the staff member, but the resident? And how does what I do, if I don't show up for a shift, now I'm back in the senior living world, Betty might not be able to get out of bed. How do we draw that conclusion to how the work we do today is meaningful? And I do truly believe that those that feel connected to their clients just have less of that because they feel more of the connectedness to the client or the resident. So they're contemplating, do I go to my son's baseball game or this resident that I really care about? I know they need help. And that's maybe an extreme, but I do think continuing to connect back to what we're doing and why we're doing it. So it isn't just seen as a job itself, but more of a responsibility and a passion. Because I think it is easy to prioritize what's in front of you, your family, that's all a very positive thing. But then how do we interplay that with what needs to happen for the residents?
I think tactically too, technology, right? Like that's how we give people flexibility, is you put it in front of their face on an app with a good user interface that they're used to using all day, every day on their phone, so that we don't find ourselves in that vicious cycle where I missed something because I didn't realize. And then now I have a challenge and it snowballs. And it's I really the only way we're going to get to an incredibly a more flexible workforce for our hourly caregivers is going to be technology. That's the only way we're going to, the other stuff is critically important, but without, I think, the technology to support, to support the staffing, you're not going to get there.
Yeah. And I think a big part of it is that if I know, if I'm a frontline caregiver and I know I'm supposed to work this shift and I know my kid's got a ball game and I do want to do my work both because I care about my residents, I care about my paycheck, but I also got my kids that I really care about, and I know that they're getting older every day. If I have a mechanism where I know I can come to you, Emily, as my boss and say, hey, my kid's got a game, can you help me get out of that? And I know you're probably going to make that happen for me. That's a lot better than me looking at it and saying, oh, I know Emily's going to say, no, I've got to work. But also knowing that if I just call up at the last minute and leave a message on the voice machine or send an email or a text saying, hey, I'm not making it in today, that nobody's going to fire me because they need me that bad. So it seems like creating those systems to make it easier is a big part of making this all happen, right?
Well, and one
And
step
taking-
further, Steve, a lot of the technologies that, well, I shouldn't say a lot, some of the high technologies that we're working with have the ability for me even to say, hey, I can't work, but I already got my buddy Steve to work. We've put it through the system. I just need you to approve it. And we're on our way, right? So I might still have a commitment and I'm committed to my role. It doesn't need to be one or the other, but now I have done the work because I have this great technology to find my own replacement, to submit that replacement, and no one's worse off for it. So I think that's a point too, to your point. It's not even just needing to go back to the scheduler to have faith they're going to fix it for you. I can take that autonomy as an individual and do that.
Well, and I love this, right? Because I think that people really like to be able to take control and feel like they've got control. And so if you can actually take and put that control in somebody else's hand, in the hand of the caregiver, to be a part of figuring out the solution, it's going to be better for everybody. It's going to be better for the community. People will love their jobs better. People feel like they get to do the family things that they need to do. And so that I really like that a lot. So if we're just about out of time here. I'm watching this and I'm going, yeah, I'm still really struggling with paying too much. What are 1, 2, or 3 things that I could do next week to start working on my staff? Just one or two or three bullet points.
1 or 2 or 3. There's so many things though, Steve. I would say, first and foremost, start looking at your data, right? Because you say you're paying too much, but what does that actually mean? Where is that happening? Where are your dollars going? I would say I'll keep touting the full-time employee piece. If you've got full-time people that aren't working full-time hours, sit down and have a chat with them, figure out where they can get. See, those are my 2 big ones that I'd say are tactical out the gate. I could list off probably 15 more, but Brett, anything you would
is
say?
Dial Emily up.
Yes.
What's that?
Yeah, dial Emily up and call scheduling.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you guys are looking for a solution, you're struggling, maybe they have a technology solution, you'll like talking to them, they'll give you some ideas. So I would really recommend that you take a look. They have actually a couple of downloads on their website that you can take a look at. And we are, I guess, about out of here. Brett, Emily, thank you for joining me. Have a great weekend. And if you'll hang on for a second after we're done, with that, we will say to all of you, have a great weekend. And we'll be back next week with another great show.